All right, let's talk seasonal lure selection for the entire year. Yeah, you know, you're not going to use the exact same baits all year long, and if you use a similar bait or the same bait throughout the year, you're going to fish it in different areas and you're going to fish it in different ways. So let's cover that real quick. Starting with winter, because winter, you're going to have actually the least amount of choices when it comes to baits. It's actually the easiest time to fish in terms of bait selection because everything's slow. Everything's moving really. This is when the water temps are below 50 degrees. The bait fish and the forage that the bass are feeding upon are moving really slow. So that wipes out any of your fast moving baits, and bass aren't hitting topwater in the wintertime. So take your topwaters off the table, take your horizontal moving baits like spinner baits, crank baits, chatter baits, take all those, take them off the table. What you're left with are things that you drag on the bottom. So primarily that means jigs. Like that's going to be your number one bait here in the wintertime is a jig. And you're fishing in deeper water. Deeper is relative to whatever lake you're in, but deeper typically means deeper than 15 foot deep. Depends on the lake you're at and the water conditions. Now, in my neck of the woods, I have a lot of clear water and I have a lot of deep lakes that go deeper than 100 feet. The bass like to hang out in that 45 to 55 foot range during the wintertime. Your lakes might not get that deep, or they may hang out in deeper water. But the key point here is just because a lake may go 100 foot deep doesn't mean they're going to be at the bottom at 100 foot. Bass typically don't like to get that deep. So don't go fishing that far. You got to find them. You got to use your depth finders to find them. You know, fish main lake points, creek channels, ledges, humps, ridges that are in that depth range. Typically, again, at 15 to 30 foot deep is where I would go if I knew nothing about that lake. And you're just dragging these jigs over that structure. Slowly dragging it, not hopping and skipping it or giving it extra action. Slowly dragging it using a 1/2 ounce jig. I'm using a trailer that has very little action to it, like a Zoom chunk, right? It just very little action. Doesn't have a lot of movement on it, so it doesn't have like flanges. A lot of trailers you have these days have an edge or flange on the end of them, which makes them kick and move a lot of action. Don't use those in the wintertime. You want a little bit of action. So dragging that on the bottom using a black and blue, black and chartreuse. Sometimes a brown jig works really well, but in those deeper depths, the light penetration isn't as good, and the sun is lower in the horizon anyway. So the colors get all muted. So don't get too crazy about what colors you want to use. I like to use the darker pigments because they contrast on the bottom of the lake. It'll show up better. A dark shadow will show up better on the bottom of a lighter color bottom of a lake than it would a lighter color. Football jig is a number one choice for doing this. Just slowly crawling it over the bottom. And that's all you need. As for plastics, Texas rig plastics are going to be also something that is going to work really, really well. A worm or a creature bait works really, really well. I like to use tubes. Texas rig tube, or I'll put a tube in the back of a split shot rig or even a Carolina rig and do the same thing with the jigs. Just dragging it over those humps, those ridges, right along those breaks. You can find anything that's different on the bottom. If you got a long sloping straight bottom, it's typically not going to hold fish. But if you've got some scattered boulders in there, some stumps, something that's going to hold them in this deeper water, that is the type of thing I want to target. Steeper banks is also the key thing. Steeper rocky banks, dock pilings, or bridge pilings. Those are the areas I'm going to target. So I may skip a long bank, for example, go into a bridge. If a bridge, by the way, if you got 2 points that come together and go back out, and then you got a bridge across here, you've got a little bit of a funnel point here too. So those bridge points, bridge pilings and the points where the bridges are adhered to, those can be good areas. So just target that type of structure during the wintertime. Your bait selection is going to be pretty minimal. Now, for the spring, it starts to open up. Remember, in calendars, we've got a calendar, right? Winter, spring, fall, summer. It's not the same. With bass behavior, you got to break it up into mini seasons, and spring is a prime example of that. Spring, it centers all around the spawn. So really, and that spawn happens right around that 60 degree, low 60 degree water mark, right? When the water temperature's in those low 60 degrees, that's typically when the spawn happens in bulk. Now, There's going to be some fish that spawn before that when the temps are in the mid to upper 50s. And there's going to be some fish that spawn when the temps get, 67, 72 degrees. But the bulk of them will spawn in that low 60-degree range. So that's your pivot point. So in spring, you've got pre-spawn, you've got spawn, and then you got post-spawn. So you can break it into 3 mini seasons. So in the pre-spawn, we're talking the water temps right when it breaches that 50-degree mark. Right, it gets up in that upper 40s, 50, 51 degrees. Now you're into pre-spawn, all the way up to about 60 degrees. You start off slow. You're fishing the baits a little bit slower, but shallower. Instead of getting that deeper water, like I mentioned, now moving up to that 10 to 15 foot range, even 8 foot, that's an 8 to 15 foot range. You're fishing at the beginning of that pre-spawn period. You're dragging baits again, so your bait selection is the same as it was in the wintertime, but I might throw in slow rolling a spinner bait, or using a deep diving crankbait. Again, moving it really slow, those rocky banks, those primary, main lake points, and the secondary points moving into the backs of flats. Those are the areas I would target. As the water warms up, then I'd go to those sloping gravel areas, those areas that got some weeds in it, the docks that are in deeper water, sunken brush piles, and move it up to that 6 to 10 foot range, moving up even shallower as you get closer to 60 degrees. Now you're moving up less than 5 foot deep, and your arsenal changes. Now not so much topwater except for frogs. Frogs can work when the water temperature gets about 52, 53 degrees all the way up through the spawn, but other topwater baits not so much. But now you can use spinner baits. Lipless crankbaits work really well in the pre-spawn. Make sure you're using those. I like to use the crawdad patterns because pretty much during the winter times the crawdads aren't very active. They don't come out and play a lot during the wintertime, but now when it's warmed up, they get more active, and they're a protein snack for bass. So a lot of times they shift their diet from baitfish to crawdad. So a crawdad pattern crankbait and jigs that are crawdad patterns work really well on the pre-spawn. Senkos come into play. Yum dingers, weightless, wacky rigged or rig 'em Texas rig work really well in the pre-spawn. Man, you can have yourself a heyday during that time. So working those areas all the way up to the spawn. When the spawn occurs, you can see the bass on beds sometimes they're very, very well concealed. A couple of key things about it. Number one, just because they're on a bed doesn't mean they're an easy target. A lot of times they're very wary. They're not going to bite your baits. They're busy spawning. They're busy protecting beds. They're not thinking about eating things. So they're not as easy to hook as you would think. And a lot of times they're hidden very well. Or they're up against areas where there's bushes or docks or the snaggy thing. So it's tough to get a lure in there without getting hung up. That said, Texas rig plastic baits reign supreme. A tube, like a white tube, or a Texas rig lizard, or a rage bug. It's a bluegill kind of profile. Bluegill are nest raiders, and it's a natural predator to the bass, so they tend to hit that more. Key thing when you're fishing bedding bass is if you're targeting them, catch them, photograph, weigh them, and release them. Let them get right back to the spawning process immediately so they can continue that and make sure you've got plenty of babies and fish for years to come on your favorite lake. If you start catching them off beds, that just ends that process right there. And you do that a lot over time and it can impact the fishery. So don't keep the fish if you're fishing them off beds. That's just my little tip right there. Post-spawn, you've got to kind of break it up a couple little seasons right there. Immediately after post-spawn, you've got some fish that are in a funk, primarily the female fish. They're a little bit tired, they're worn out from spawning. Some of the males are like that too. They're just not really in the mood to eat. They kind of want to get their energy reserves back up. That's a short, brief period, maybe a week or two right after the spawn. And then they start feeding up, regaining their energy levels. And sometimes they get very aggressive. At the same time, you've got some males that are protecting fry. And we call them fry garters. Those are very aggressive bass as well. So topwaters become really good baits to throw this time of year because the bass are super aggressive. So in addition to the frogs that you've been throwing, now buzz baits, walking baits, pop-bars, those type of things become very popular, and for good reason. You can have yourself a blast for 2 to 3 weeks after the spawn can be really fun for topwater baits. Crankbaits can be really good. And spinner baits, fast moving baits, horizontal presentations can be excellent this time of year. Right after after that funky period, man, to me, when the bass are in that funk and they're really not biting, that's the time when a soft plastic stick bait like a Yum Dinger or a Senko shines. Sometimes that's like the only thing they're gonna bite during that period. But that is waning, it's short, and then those aggressive topwater bites come into play, and it's a whole heck of a lot of fun. So that's the spring. Moving into summertime, now you can open up your arsenal. There's a lot of baits you can throw, pretty much anything, and you can catch fish on most any of that stuff. There's subtle differences, but the key thing is finding the bass. That's like the hardest thing to do in the summertime. The bulk of the bass population move back out a little bit deeper, not as deep as they were in the wintertime, but somewhere in between that depth and where they were spawning. They'll find main lake points, secondary points, deeper weed lines, humps, ridges, stumps, scattered boulders, even creek channels. And the key thing is cover. So you're looking for all that stuff I just mentioned, and weeds, and also forage. If the forage is there and the cover is there, man, the bass aren't going anywhere. And that means some of the bass stay shallow as well. They don't all abandon the shallows. That's kind of a myth, and I'm trying to break that. Guys, sometimes even the heat of summertime, it's 100 degrees out and the water temps in the upper 80s. Those weeds put off oxygen, they put off shade, there's a lot of cover in there, a lot of bait fish stay in there too. And if that's all there, then the bass are gonna be there too. So working the tops of weeds with a frog, for example, can work really well. Or work, a weightless Senko or a soft plastic stick bait, or any kind of Texas rig plastic bait, flipping and pitching and throwing it into those weeds and working them through those weeds. Swimming a lizard along docks, skipping tubes under docks, skipping finesse jigs under docks. Anything you can skip under a dock on a nice hot summer day. If you got weeds all around the dock, even better, because now you've got shade and comfort under the dock, and you've got the weeds that harbor all the bait fish and the insects and stuff that the bass feed on. They're just happy kittens underneath those docks. So if you can get a bait skipped underneath there, you can go from dock to dock to dock and catch a lot of fish, despite it being shallow water. In those deeper areas, you get less weeds, so crankbaits work really well. You can drag those jigs, but now instead of just dragging them really slow like we were in the wintertime, you can work them with faster. You can hop and pop and jig them along the bottom. A lot of times you're looking for a reaction strike, so let it sit on the bottom, reel up to it, and pop it off the bottom and let it flutter back down. A lot of times those bass come up when you're doing that. They're, woo, what's that? And they're looking, and they might, I don't know what it is. And then you, bam, give it that quick yank, and that quick movement, boom, they just react. Something's getting away from them, and they better take it or they'll lose it forever, and that elicits a strike. So those quick kind of movements can get a lot of strikes. If you're fishing crankbaits, you want to make sure you're banging them off of something. If you're going through rocks or stumpy areas or areas of scattered boulders or riprap, every once in a while you want that lip to hit that rock and bounce it and deflect it and go off in a different direction. That quick change of direction often is what triggers a strike. So, in the morning hours, low light conditions, or a cloudy day, topwaters, man. Fish topwaters. It's so much fun. Buzz baits, walking baits, poppers. It can be dynamite this time of year. Dynamite in the summertime. So don't forget to throw those. Now as you move into the fall, things change rapidly. The forage moves shallow. The bass are going to all move up with them, so a lot of bass abandon those deep water areas that are hanging in the summertime. They feed exclusively on shad or perch and bluegill, and it's a feeding frenzy. However, it's not a guaranteed thing. It's not a sure thing. Because the bass are following bait fish, it's a kind of a here today, gone tomorrow. One day you can throw a safety pin out there and they will climb over each other to get at it and bite it, and the next day you can't buy a bite. So it's kind of weird fishing. It's a bonanza or nothing, feast or famine kind of deal. So you got to stay on top of the fish. Bait fish type baits is what you want to use. A crankbait reigns supreme during the fall periods. And same thing with any kind of soft plastic bait that resembles a bait fish, like a rage bug. Those type of things got a bluegill type of profile to them. Topwater is excellent. Anything that looks like an injured minnow, so a popper or a prop bait, Zero spook. Those work really well. You'll see bass schooling up on these bait fish. You often see them blowing up on bait fish right now. They'll school them into a big herd and then they just start blowing up on them. And so throwing a top water into that frenzy, you often get bit. I find that that activity begins when you get the first fog or maybe even the first freeze overnight, real cold temperatures. That like turns on and the bass are like, hey, winter's coming, I need to eat and prepare for the winter. So watch for that. Early fall, you get that transition period, the weeds start dying off and the bass start moving a little bit deeper. And then that freeze happens and suddenly they're all shallow again and that activity happens, but it's quick. It only happens for a couple weeks and then those weeds are dying off and everything starts moving out deeper again. If you find brown weeds, don't fish them. They're consuming oxygen, not giving it out. And so there's not gonna be any bait fish or bass in those areas. So move out till you find the green weeds, and that's typically where you'll find the bass. So, and then you get into the winter time again, and we're back to doing that again. I forgot to mention jigging spoons work really well in the summertime and in the winter time. Just jigging that up and down works really well for suspended bass hanging out over humps and ridges in the summertime, and in the wintertime, same thing too. So hope that helps. For more tips and tricks like that, visit bassresource.com.